Hey. Oh, hey. Sorry about that. What a weird way to start the stream. Oh, man. I say hi, and then I got to clear my throat. How's it going, everyone? I'm obviously Nathaniel Robojans, Nintendo Prime. You guys know the drill at this point if you're watching this channel or this stream, or if it's the first time you've ever seen my channel, streams, videos, welcome. We always start off our streams, or I try to, by saying hi to people in the chat. It's hard to say hi to everyone on some streams, but I think it'll be a little easier today. In the chat right now, we got Christopher Lockhart, Han Solo, username, password, Sweet Life of Dio Brando, the Wet One, Brian C is here as well. Hi, I'm Henry, and I'm sure others that might pop in along the way. We got Link Gaming here as well. So I'll try to shout people out as we go. We'll see. There's some things I want to address this morning. I get my little morning pick-me-up. Bang! Oh my gosh, it's like a miracle in a can. Having candy apple crisp. Never had this flavor before. Is what it is. We got Joyce E. Johnson here. Bryson De Evie is here. So, I want to address... we're going to start off by obviously talking about some Cyberpunk 2077. And no, folks, I haven't played the game yet. I'm not avoiding the game. It's just a cash money situation. I knew at the time when I bought Immortals Phoenix Rising, that I either was going to be buying Immortals Phoenix Rising or Cyberpunk. I couldn't afford both this month. That's just the way it is. I have other obligations. It's the holidays, other things I need to spend my money on. So I knew that I could only get a single game this month, and I chose Immortals because I am impatient and can't wait. So, it is what it is. I actually don't regret my purchase at all. I really enjoy Immortals Phoenix Rising. I bought the Switch version. It's all good. But yeah, I am going to get Cyberpunk 2077 as soon as I can afford to, which will be sometime in January or February. So yeah, we'll dive into impressions and live streams and all that jazz about that game, specifically over on Twitch, where we'll be live streaming the game. But we'll do secondhand videos here about it months later, especially after major patches land. Here. But what I want to talk about is why I haven't really been talking about this game. Now you might think, well, you're Nintendo Prime. Why would you talk about it? Well, because I talk about other games as well. And this is one of the largest releases of the year, maybe one of the largest releases of the last generation of systems, and obviously one of the biggest for the new generation of systems, which is a very short-lived generation so far, unless you consider that Switch is technically, based on Nintendo's release schedule, part of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X generation. Maybe I'll make a video on that sometime where I just repeat the same points for 10 minutes because I don't know what else to do. But that's why that video hasn't come into existence, because it's like a 30-second video. But I think that Cyberpunk 2077 is probably one of the best games of this of this generation, of last gen, of current gen, of just gaming in general. It has a 90 plus on Metacritic, or 91 or whatever it is. That's great. I think there is a point to Metacritic ratings. I think there's a point to reviews and review scores. But I also think that there's a point, that you kind of reach a point before a game comes out, before reviews even land, if you're interested in a game or not. And if you're not interested in Cyberpunk 2077, no review or score is going to make you interested. So reviews have a purpose. They grant greater insight if there's something you were hoping to see, or if you wanted to wait and see, you wanted to know if the game was super buggy at launch. That's something that, might make you want to wait to purchase the game or spend money on it later when maybe it goes down in price. Okay, fine. I think there is a purpose to reviews for sales reasons and Metacritic ratings. I'm not one of those people that's anti-Metacritic and thinks it's like the devil. I think the way that video game companies utilize it is Cyberpunk 2077's original bonuses were built around having a 90-plus Metacritic rating. They have since backed on that, but a lot of companies base bonuses on Metacritic ratings, which I think is just a ridiculous thing to base bonuses on, because that means a game could sell 80 million copies, but because it got an 89 on Metacritic instead of a 90, nobody got bonuses except for obviously the top execs. That is bullshit. So it should be based on game sales and success rather than based on ratings. But that's just my opinion. Obviously, feel free to disagree. But Johnny Silverhand's here. So when we're talking about Cyberpunk 2077, a huge reason I've been avoiding talking about the game that much, beyond I mentioned a brief little thing like at the end of a video about sales where it's selling extremely well, no surprise, and then obviously I talked about crunch in the past, is because since those crunch videos, I was very vehemently against crunch. I was very vehemently, chastising CD Projekt Red. And I have since had my eyes opened a little bit on that, along with other issues. I think on the internet sometimes we can fall down rabbit holes. And when you go down certain rabbit holes, it's really hard to dig out and see other perspectives and see other sides of things. As an example, you might not even be aware, but apparently there's this big controversy around transphobia in Cyberpunk 2077, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first I'm going to focus on the crunch aspect. And I was opened up to alternative perspectives on crunch because a certain member who wanted to be unnamed sent me a video. They sent me a video that just went up yesterday by David Jaffe. For those who don't know who David Jaffe is, he has worked on the Twisted Metal series, and he has been a director for the God of War series. So he has been in the AAA industry for 20 plus years. And I warn you, he's pretty crass and pretty blunt in the video. It's on his own YouTube channel, which has hardly any subscribers, 16,000 subs. For someone who's so important in the industry, he's obviously not focusing his life on YouTube. But he decided to speak out on Video Game Crunch. And the title of his video, in fact, I'll link it in the chat right now. The title of his video is called Video Game Crunch, All Gamers' Fault. So he's basically blaming gamers for Video Game Crunch existing. And we all know that obviously, if you buy the game, you support crunch. But it's not just about buying the game. It's what we're demanding of AAA games. So he basically goes on to say that all great things have been made with crunch. If you think about it over the years, when iPhone was invented, you think that happened without crunch? When PCs were invented, you think that happened? You think the Industrial Revolution happened without people working hundreds and hundreds of hours of overtime? Every major advancement in society has happened through the use of either slave labor or treating people like slave labor, even if they're compensated well. It's just come through people working excessive amount of hours, forced or unforced. That's just the way society has always advanced. And this is because a majority of the world works in a capitalist mindset, meaning that all we care about is amassing wealth and through greed, holding on to our wealth as much as possible, right? That is how a majority of the world works, and that is what drives, forced overtime and crunch and slave labor. It's all driven by greed, capitalism, grabbing wealth and being afraid of letting it go because we're all afraid to live a life with no money. We're all afraid of what happens if we live paycheck to paycheck and we lose our job. Some of us have experienced that. Not a good feeling. Some of us go homeless, live on the streets, and never get out of that rut even. So this is something that we all fear. So once you start to make money, you have a fear of what happens if I stop making that kind of money. So then you'll work the crunch. You'll do whatever it needs to do to keep amassing wealth, even if it ends up being something where you lose your wife, right? She leaves you or something. It sucks. No one should have to work so many hours that they're going to lose their family. But it's also a choice you make. You can make a different choice, work a lesser job in IT, just go to a company and be their computer guy 9 to 5 in some cubicle somewhere, or you just are answering people's tech questions about why they can't access their damn Gmail accounts, even though their Gmail accounts aren't even located on Google servers. They might be located on a local server, and all they really need to do is just turn it on and off again. Close their browser, completely close Chrome down, reopen. Look, it all works again. Clear their cache. Look, it all works again. These simplistic things that you didn't really go to college for a degree to do. Your degree will help you get these cheaper 9 to 5 jobs that give you all that freedom, give you your vacation time when you want to take your vacation time, give you that 9 to 5 where you barely ever have to work overtime, and you can have all that time. But it ends up being a choice that you make. He says most game developers, when you get into AAA development, already know what they're getting into before they take the job. He said it's impossible to be hired by CD Projekt Red and be hired by Naughty Dog and not be at least aware from somebody somewhere. If not, when you get hired, other employees will tell you that there is going to be a ton of crunch, that you're going to be working a ton of overtime. And if it's not for you, leave. And they don't. Now, some do. And I've talked about how, there's lots of employees that do leave. But then they just leave and go to other companies that do the same thing. It's interesting not because I think that overtime and forced overtime is okay. But I think it's something that we as a community don't fully understand because we don't always live into it. I've been told as a software developer, which I'm literally in college as a software developer. I've been told by my peers, I've been told by my teachers, I've been told at job fairs, I've been told at code camps that guess what? Don't be a software developer if you don't like overtime. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't. And people always say, "Oh, if you're a software developer, you don't have to work in the video game industry if you don't like crunch." You can't be a software developer if you don't like crunch. If you're actually going to actively be writing code and being a developer or a problem solver or whatever you end up being in the industry, you're going to be working overtime. You're going to be working a lot of overtime. You're going to lose weekends. You're going to lose holidays. It happens. Now, you might be able to rise up to a certain point where you get to senior level or beyond, and then at that point, you'll be able to take some time off when you want to take time off. You know, my dad is an example. He's a CTO of a company. He's like the top you can go, but just the ring below CEO. Even he has to work long hours some weeks. Other weeks, he could take like the whole week off and it's great. And he can, for the most part, take holidays off and write his own hours. But there's some weeks that he's going to be working 100-hour weeks, even at that high position. But he does have more flexibility because of what he's worked himself up to. But everyone below him, oh, absolutely, they're working OT. They're working crunch. That's just part of the industry. David Gerard or Dylan Gerard in the chat says, "Hey, I'm a software developer. It doesn't always happen, but I've had to work after hours or weekends in the past. It sucks, but it comes with the territory." And that's what they say. You can find jobs that aren't as bad about it because you're mostly just maintaining software, right? So like if you work on a large team at say like Menards, right? I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's a retail outlet. I'm not sure if it's national or not. Anyway, or let's say Walmart, right? Let's use Walmart because Walmart's everywhere. So say you get hired as a software developer at Walmart, all right? Most of what you're going to be doing in that position is maintaining already existing applications. You're not going to be writing too many. They already have mobile apps. They already have web apps. They already have a web store. Most of what you're doing is going to be maintaining, problem solving, error checking, all that jazz. You're not going to be talking to customers or any of that stuff. You're just going to be dealing with things that already exist. And chances are you're probably not really going to be working overtime because they have a team of hundreds of developers that they just keep available 24/7 for all these issues. You end up being able to work in a cozy 9 to 5 for the most part doing stuff like that. But it's also not a job that has really any advancement. You get hired, the job is what it is, you're never going to move beyond your position, and you just accept it. Again, it's like another low-level IT job. If you choose for that kind of work, you are fine. But there are people that want to make more money. They want to buy their yachts, right? They want to have a cabin out in the woods. They want to be able to take lavish vacations to Hawaii or whatever the case might be, every year or every other year or so. They want to be able to enjoy some of the finer things in life. It requires you taking on jobs that are likely going to have are likely going to have overtime, likely going to have and this isn't just true in software development, by the way, but this is just what I'm saying in terms of crunch with developers on games, is that it's kind of part of the territory, and you are warned about this. At least I'm being warned about it in college, that hey, you want to advance, you want to make the good money, you're going to be working a ton of hours at some point. Maybe not right away out the gate. Maybe it will be right away out the gate. Maybe it's just a seasonal overtime thing. Whatever the case might be, your chances are you're going to be working that. And because of David Jaff having 20 years of experience and me having very limited experience in software development, it really opens your eyes a little bit. I encourage you guys to go watch the video. Again, I'll relink it in the chat. It's a nice, short, succinct video. He does drop a couple swear words in there. But basically, it's capitalism's fault, and we're all part of the capitalism machine. And as such, you can either be someone who you can't fence sit on this. You're either someone who is all against overtime and against this crunch stuff, and you absolutely should stop buying the games, stop supporting the games, and start, trying to get certain politicians in power to do something about it differently, or just enjoy the byproducts of all this stuff. Be critical of some of the issues with it, whether it's bugs, which Cyberpunk 2077 does have a lot of bugs. Be critical of that stuff when you're reviewing it or all that jazz. But basically, don't try to have your cake and eat it too, where you're going to bitch about crunch, but then make money off the game by reviewing it. Just don't do that. You're basically just supporting the crunch culture while bitching about the crunch culture. It doesn't make any sense. He doesn't point out to YouTubers very often for this, but he just pointed like Kotaku and Polygon, which we all know will call the kettle black and then actually be the kettle at the same time. And he also says it's funny too because you'll see outlets like Kotaku bitch about crunch, but then you don't see them bitching about the fact that they crunch their own employees every E3. Where are the complaints from the employees? I'm sure they're just working standard 9 to 5s during E3, right? They're not possibly waking up at 3 in the morning and then not being able to go to bed until midnight the next night because they're literally working from 3 in the morning until then as media, playing games, doing interviews, waiting in lines, all that jazz. They're totally not doing, crunch doesn't happen in other industries. Overtime isn't a thing that exists beyond software development. Of course it is. And they don't bitch about that. Because people know what they're getting into. If you get a game journalism job, during E3 you're working crazy hours. You know it. Just like software developers know, if you work at a AAA studio, you are getting crunched. Some studios are worse than others, but you're going to be getting crunched, and you know it. Don't like it? Yeah, you can go work a different profession, or you can go get a lower ring job somewhere else, where you're just going to do basic IT and not have to deal with much of that bullshit. You're also not going to be making much money either. So, I'm not saying the companies are perfect. I know Philip brings up they could also stop giving a crap about quarterly earnings and just worry about yearly earnings like normal people. Then they would just release a game when it's ready. It's not... Let me put it this way, Philip. Because obviously I'm taking this as your way of saying, they could just wait forever to make the game. This is about yearly earnings. It so happens that there's a certain quarter of the year that most of the company's yearly earnings come in. Hello, consumerism. They make a consumer product. Consumer products are primarily bought during the third quarter or fourth quarter here in the U.S., third quarter for Japanese companies. So it just so happens that, most consumer goods are bought during a certain period. So if you're in a field of making a consumer good, that's the quarter that matters the most. So you could talk about how, don't worry about quarterly earnings, just worry about yearly earnings. But let's say you're a company that's sinking $100 million a year into game development. Every year that game doesn't release is a sunk cost year. So you can look at it as just care about yearly earnings. Okay, well, negative $100 million this year. Okay, negative $100 million next year. Negative $100 million the year after that. At what point do we just release the game? Like you're looking at this as because the company's doing okay. Okay, yeah, the company's doing okay because it's relying on the backdrop of like Witcher sales or something. But Witcher sales are dwindling. Witcher sales aren't making up for it. Is the company in the red every year? No. But is the company massively in the green either? No. Because they have a sunk cost with this massive game being made. This isn't just Cyberpunk, by the way. This is like every AAA developer. You're like, just worry about, no, they have other things to worry about. Okay? Like not having a game be in development hell for 10 years. Not having, a $1 billion game. So we need to be more understanding, I suppose, of the industry itself. And if you want it to change, there's two things to do. Bitching on the internet's not going to get it done. David Jaff makes it very clear. Bitching on the internet solves nothing. It makes you feel good. It makes you able to pat yourself on the back because you bitched. But it doesn't actually change anything. You want to change that culture. Don't buy the games. Get the people in charge of politics that can change the way our system currently works. Not unionizing, because unionizing is going to lead to jobs going overseas. David Jaff talks about that. Everyone says just unionize. Ask other industries that have dealt with unionization. It just leads to loss of jobs in the industry in America. It just makes them go to other countries to get cheaper labor. It doesn't deal with actually fixing things here. It just makes companies go find another way to get it done for even cheaper than probably what they're already paying here. And then once they realize they could get it done cheaper elsewhere, they just don't come back. They just keep outsourcing because they can. Because in other countries, that cheaper labor, the money might be worth more there. So that cheaper labor to them in those countries is actually a lot of money. So that's why unionizing isn't like the the answer to everything at all times. And he points this out because he's like, I've been in the industry 20 years. Come at me with facts. Don't come at me with ideological ideas of what you think will solve the problem without presenting any evidence of that actually working. Philip says, I'm not saying that they can take forever. Well, yes, the main earning is by March, but if you hear the meeting or quarter it is, they always focus on what's being done. Well, that's normal, Philip. Like, you can't just check in on a game once per year. Investors want to know where their money's going all year long, and so a good time to check in is every quarter. That's just normal business. Like, if I buy, let's say I buy, I don't know, $50 million. I'm an investor. I have a lot of money, right? I won the lottery, and I put $50 million into CD Projekt Red, buying up $50 million worth of stock. A lot of stock. I'm going to want to know every quarter where the hell my money's going. How's it being spent? What is becoming of my investment in your company? I'm going to want to know. I don't want to invest $50 million and only hear one yearly report. I want to know every quarter along the way what's going on. I want to see the expense sheet. I want to know where the money's going. I want to know when I can expect a return on my money. We're looking at this as consumers and not looking at this as, hey, an investor has a shitload of money invested in this. They want to know what the fuck is happening with their money. We can't just sit back and get mad at the investors all the time because they want to know where the hell their money's going. You would too if you were them. If you took a huge chunk of money and put it into a company, you want to know what the fuck is going on too. You don't want to sit there and, oh, yep, I'll hear in a year that all my money's gone and my share is now worth 5 cents when I bought it at freaking $500 a share. Like, you don't want to hear that. You want to know what's happening along the way. So that's completely normal that there's a focus on quarterly earning reports. That's at every company. Literally every company is like that. The reason you don't hear about it at, like, you work at McDonald's is because your job flipping burgers, which I'm not trying to insult McDonald's workers. I worked there in my mid-20s for like 3 years. It's whatever. You do what you got to do to pay the jobs, pay the bills. No problem. There's lifers at McDonald's. No problem with that if that's what you're happy doing. But you're not going to be worrying about quarterly reports. You're not even going to worry about yearly reports at those positions because they don't really affect you. You just get paid X amount of money per hour. You request a raise every year. You either get the raise or you don't get the raise, and you move on with your day. So it's just... And by the way, Waffles 115, so the game doesn't even look that good graphic-wise. I thought it would look better because of how long they took. You're kind of disappointed about it. Have you seen it on PC? Have you seen PC Ultra footage of this game? The lighting engine, even without ray tracing on, is so impressive in this game. You would swear it has ray tracing on at all times, even without ray tracing. And to understand how complicated lighting systems can be, that lighting system alone is one of the most impressive lighting systems ever seen in a game this side of ray tracing. And even ray tracing, adding ray tracing, turning it on in the game, you can hardly notice the difference in most situations. There's a few that you can kind of see, some indoor scenes with candles in particular, but the lighting's insane. The visuals are absolutely insane. Heck, did you know that there is so many different character walking animations in here that the world can actually feel like you're like out in the middle of New York sometimes because no two people really walk the same? It's insane the amount of work that's in Cyberpunk. It's not just about the visuals, like in terms of the graphic fidelity of the game. It's about the AI, right? It's about all the elements in the world. I mean, heck, there are some neon signs that are like kind of like flashing like in real life when the neon's kind of going out in the signs, Sometimes it's a purposeful effect. But you got that's just the way the lighting bounces off of that is just not how it works in other games. Because it's just so intensive to do it. But Cyberpunk's doing it because they don't care. And it's the design of the world, of course. That's a big issue with the Western stock market, says shareholder system. It's not just Western. It's capitalism. It's capitalism. It's not a Western problem. If you guys think this doesn't happen in Japan, let me tell you something. Nintendo's one of the worst crunch companies in the world, and we never talk about it. Nintendo employees at Kyoto and Nintendo Japan regularly work 80-hour work weeks. Just normally. They don't even call it crunch. That's just what you work. Why? Why do we not talk about that here? Why do we not talk about that in the West? Why do we just think the East doesn't have these issues? Because it's ingrained in their society. They're supposed to work that. We think 40-hour work week, that's what you're supposed to do. Europe thinks 40 hours is too much. You should only be working 25 to 30. Japan? Nope. Work is a source of honor, a source of pride. You do it as much as possible. Period. Families understand it. The workplaces understand it. Everyone understands it. Free time's a luxury. You should be working. Nintendo has insane crunch, but they don't call it that because their employees are like Masahiro Sakurai. We all know how hard that guy works, right? Not technically an official Nintendo employee anymore, even though he works on Smash. The guy is in the middle of a pandemic working from home. Do you think for one iota he's working less hours now than he was when he was in studio, when he's consistently delivering us new characters? Consistently, in the middle of a pandemic, pumping out new characters as if nothing has changed. How do you think that's happening? You think it's because he's working less hours because he's working at home? Or is it possible he's still pushing 80 hours a week? And that's just him at the top. Imagine what the people underneath him are doing. But it's not considered a problem in Japan. It's not considered a problem in the East because it's just expected. You're supposed to work that. Now, you could say, as Novus talks, that's pretty effed up when you think about it, but is it? Who are we to tell people how they should spend their life? If you grow up in a culture where most of your life is being told, or you grew up where you're expected for most of your life to be work, and they're happy doing it, who are we to tell them, sorry, you should work less? Because you'll have a better work-life balance and more happiness when they grew up in a culture where happiness is work. Does Miyamoto look like he's unhappy? Does Eiji Inoue, and I'm just saying names that we know publicly because we're not going to know the developers, but do they look unhappy? Does Masahiro Sakurai look unhappy? Do these people look unhappy? They don't even complain. Even when Sakurai in an interview will bring up, his wrist issues and hand issues, he's just bringing it up in passing during a conversation. He's not bringing it up as a complaint that he wants to work less. These people enjoy it. Who are we to tell them how to spend their life and how to enjoy? But, Philip brings up that Japan doesn't allow the shareholders to push them around. Hell, they wanted to make Mario run, have microtransactions to make Mario jump higher, and Nintendo told them to F off. Nintendo did not tell them to F off. If you don't think Japanese companies pay attention to their shareholders and their desires, you are wrong. You're focusing on Nintendo too much. Here's the thing. A majority of Nintendo is owned by Nintendo. Nobody can tell Nintendo what to do, because Nintendo owns a majority of their own shares. There's only one family that has more shares in Nintendo than Nintendo themselves. And that family is the founding family of Nintendo. So, wow, who would know the founding family of Nintendo is typically going to side with Nintendo on any of these shareholder things. And so when you have the founding family, which owns a majority of shares, and then you have Nintendo, which owns the second majority of shares, and you combine their voting powers together, no other investor can tell Nintendo what to do, because they don't have the power in the shareholder meetings to do so. So don't think that Japanese companies don't pay attention to their shareholders and try to deliver shareholders' expectations. They absolutely do. You think Konami is the way it is today because the shareholders didn't get a say? Absolutely not. Nintendo's just smarter. They were smarter in how they control their own stock, basically. They did it in a way where they can't be bought out, so no one can just buy Nintendo, and no one can tell Nintendo what to do. This was set up intentionally by the founding family of Nintendo. They set up Nintendo in this way so no one else could do hostile takeovers and tell Nintendo what to do. Nintendo is a very big outlier to most companies. Most companies do not own a majority of their own stock. Now, their employees might own a majority of their own stock. Like if you look at things like Woodman's, I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's a grocery store chain. It's owned by the employees because you get stock as employees. So basically the employees own a majority of Woodman's. There are situations like that. But most of these big multi-billion-dollar businesses, of course the shareholders get a say. Majority shareholders especially get a say. It's just that Nintendo's majority shareholders are themselves and then the family that founded them. Now, if the family that founded them makes a demand of Nintendo, oh, of course they're going to listen. Other shareholders, they'll give you your dividends. You know, they'll tell you when you're going to get your dividends. They'll do their financial meetings. And they'll tell you how the company's doing even. Notice that all these financial briefs they do every quarter, what do? They tell you, they give a full spreadsheet of all of the financials. Because they have to do that. That's like a requirement of being a publicly traded company. You have to have your financials public. Now, they don't have to show their tax return filings publicly, but Joyce C. Johnson says, I still don't agree with consistent crunch, but I do agree as gamers we can be a little greedy. I think if developers gave us a few more updates and gamers were a little more patient, we could find a middle ground. And part of the problem, too, as gamers, is that we demand more of our games than we ever have in the past. The amount of time it takes to make The Legend of Zelda on NES versus the time it makes to make Breath of the freaking Wild is astronomically different. The size of the teams required are astronomically different. We demand more of our games than we ever have in the past. What do we think happens when we keep demanding more and 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 more? We just keep demanding more out of our AAA games. Oh, we want Madden as an example. Oh, we want Madden franchise mode and Madden to make major advances every single year. We want Madden to revolutionize. Like next year is the first true next-gen Madden game. We want it to be freaking amazing, but they have a year to make it. How do you think they're going to pull that off? How do you think that would happen if they pulled it off? With insane crunch for hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. The more we demand, the more crunch there's going to be. Now, this isn't everyone, of course, but it's true. I think we can see it's true. The expectations we put on AAA games are insanely high, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be insanely high. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be insanely critical, but I'm saying that we need to understand the other side of being insanely critical and being insanely demanding of these games. It supports crunch to do so. Because that's the only way the games are going to be made right. You might say, well, they could just take extra years. No, they can't. They can't just go to investors and say, hey, we need even more money because we need another 5 years. They can't do that. Nintendo can, sure, because Nintendo is just telling themselves that. But other companies can't. Most companies aren't majority owned by themselves. So they can't do that. True in the West, true in the East, true everywhere. Bottom line is, I don't like forced overtime in any profession. But when you talk to actual game developers, when you talk to directors, of course, when you talk to people within the industry, they know what this industry is, and they, for the most part, don't really want it to change. And why don't they want it to change? Because of the benefits they get of the job, the great health care they get, the great bonuses they get, the pay they get, plus they enjoy it. Some people legitimately just want to work those long hours. At the end of the day, it's only going to change if society changes. And I'm not talking about us buying the games, although that's part of the society. It's about getting politicians in place. David Jaff really lays it out perfectly what has to happen. We have to get politicians in place, which we're never going to get enough of them that care about it in place. But we need to get politicians in place that are going to pass policies that do something about this beyond that isn't a unionization thing. Things like social work programs. So he points out he has a developer buddy out in France, right? was working at a major company. Maybe it was Ubisoft. I think he even said that he thinks it was Ubisoft. He was working at a major company out in France. He quit his job. He just quit. He was tired of the crunch, so he quit. Well, instead of quitting and just being boned, French law requires that the parent company that you quit pays your full salary up to an extra year after you leave the company. So for one whole year, 12 months after you quit, you weren't even laid off. You quit your job. You still get your full salary for an entire year, paid out to you like you normally would over that year. During that year, his buddy crunched like a mofo on his own game. At the end of that year, he found someone who was willing to publish that game, and now he's a relatively successful indie developer, making his own hours and doing whatever he wants. This happened because of a social work program in place in France that allowed people to quit their jobs that have this kind of OT, still get paid enough time to figure out what's next. Kind of like a year-long severance package in a way, forced by the government. Imagine that if you worked at all these companies in the United States, EA, Gearbox, whatever company you work for, 343, whatever company, 2K, right? Doesn't matter, Rockstar, whatever AAA company you're working at, you had an option at any point to quit. Get paid for an entire year after quitting, with no pressure to find a job in that year, by the way. It's just no strings attached. That company has to pay your salary for the next year while you figure out what's next. How much more independent games do you think how much more efforts, like, I don't know, the company that Platonic Games that came together to make Yooka-Laylee would happen? How many people would be like, hey, look, we're sick of this crunch environment. How about all of us quit EA, form our own studio while we're still getting paid, and make a game? But the programs don't exist for it. And you might think that kind of program shouldn't exist, and that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that kind of program. It's just an example of a program that exists that promotes people saying, hey, if you don't want to work in that kind of culture, you can get out of it and have a year to figure your shit out, to figure out what's next for you, whether it's going back to school, whether it's changing professions, or whether it's taking a lower level job somewhere else, or whatever the case might be, or working on your own projects. It's a year to figure out your life, to figure out what you want to do next without punishing you for deciding that you don't want to do forced overtime anymore. And I don't know what, there's more specifics to the law, to what triggers it, but you kind of get my point. It's just an option. We don't have anything like that in the United States. Closest we have is unemployment that you don't get if you quit. If you quit your job, you don't get unemployment. You get unemployment if you get laid off. And our unemployment pays vary state to state. And if you're working a nice job, making anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 plus a year, reality is unemployment per week is not going to cover what you would have made normally at your job. So even though even on unemployment, you'll have these strict requirements for job searches and all that, which is fine. That's an unemployment program. That's a you got fired program, basically, or you got laid off because of financial reasons program. So, that's a different kind of social program versus, hey, I chose to quit my job. John said, how's my Series X holding up for you? Everything's still working? Yeah, dude. I had no problem since I took it apart. You wouldn't even know I'm missing a screw. And no problems with the liquid metal. Now, this is just crunch. I think I spent a long time talking about crunch here. Get to some of the replies here. We got Riley. Fincher saying, everyone hides things. Sakurai could very well be struggling with the workload and just be hiding it. Just look at Japan's homes population. They refuse to ask for help. Well, he is struggling in some health. Although he has said his health is doing better now. And he did take some time off. Sakurai took some time off. What was this, 3 years ago? Whatever. Sakurai took some time off because of his health. And during that time off, he didn't even look at a computer, apparently. So he said this publicly himself. So they take time off. Nintendo gives you the benefit of working at Nintendo, from what I'm being told from people that work there in Japan, is for all the hours you work, everyone gets time off that you can take off whenever you want. Everyone gets holidays off. Outside of holidays, outside of, when you take your vacations, you are expected to work really long hours. That's kind of yep, You work long hours, but you can get vacation. You can take time off. You can this. You can that. So Nintendo tends to treat their employees very well. That's why most people that get hired at Nintendo of Japan are lifers. They don't go anywhere because they get treated very well. It's not as bad in the West where you might be forced to work those hours and you don't get holidays off and you can't take your vacation time when you want to take it, if you get to take it at all while the game's being developed. Philip says, yes, exactly. This is a common thing in Japan. Japanese company founders have safeguards in place to prevent them from losing control of their company. Not every company does. That's not true of every company, but it's true of Nintendo. I think Sony doesn't control a majority of their own shares, but their two majority shareholders, I think, are intimately linked to Sony, and I don't think would ever vote against them. But it's hard to know. There's been major shifts that Sony as well made because of the investors, so it's hard to really understand that. There's even investors at Sony that are extremely concerned that they are reliant right now so heavily on the video game industry to stay afloat, because without that and insurance, Sony's in trouble. But they do have those, and they're not in trouble right now. So Sony's kind of in a situation where it's trying to figure out how it can go back to diversifying revenue across everything. They still make cameras, they still do movies and stuff, but they're not nearly as profitable as they once were. So Sony's kind of trying to figure out how to diversify. Nintendo tried to diversify with health products. We haven't seen anything come of that yet. Let's see here. Forced overtime dehumanizes people to machines. In a way, it can. It can. I'm not going to sit here and say the forced overtime doesn't kind of treat people like machines at times. Expecting, especially like machines that could just be pushed harder and harder and harder and still get really high end results, when we know that working a certain amount of overtime over a certain amount of time, eventually the quality of our work diminishes. That's just what happens because we're humans and we're not machines, and we wear out mentally, we wear out physically. We can't keep producing the same quality of work that we could, and they even say you work, 16-hour shifts. You're probably more productive at the beginning of your shift than you are at the end of your shift. End of your shift, you're so tired, you're just trying to get through, you're just looking at the clock, you're waiting for it to tick to the right hour, and then you get the hell out, if you can get out at all. But at the same point, unless you signed up at a company that promised you there wouldn't be any crunch, do research in your I guess David Jeff's general message is when you're looking at it for a career, research into your career before you go down your career path. Certain careers, you're guaranteed to have overtime. Software developer, which is what a lot of developers are in the video game industry, that's why they're called developers. They are developing software. They are writing lines of code. They know they will be working forced overtime and being compensated for it at most companies. There are some really, really shitty companies out there that really crappy about how they pay people because of the contracts. They could try to force your overtime but not pay you more. Some of the salaries and some of the contracts, you get a really bad negotiated contract and you actually get forced to work a 100-hour week, but you only get paid the same as you would if you worked 20 hours. That happens with salaries, but sometimes the salary is only $30,000 a year at that point. You are being effed in the ass and you need to quit that job. There are companies like that. Thankfully, a majority of the major companies aren't like that anymore. EA doesn't do that anymore. EA now compensates and does bonuses and does a lot of great stuff for their employees. People in general like working for EA. I know we bitch about EA a lot, rightfully so, for some of their anti-consumer practices, but they actually treat their employees really well. Really, really well. They compensate them. We always talk about, oh man, the CEO is making how many hundreds of millions of dollars? I'm like, yeah, but their employees are also making, oh yeah, but the average employee, I'm like, yeah, you're right. The average employee is only making $80,000 a year. They're fine. They're making good money. That's just their salaries. Doesn't include their bonuses. Doesn't include their health insurance benefits, their gym memberships. Everything else they get as a perk for working there. That's EA, of course. I just know this because I know 4 developers at 3 different EA studios. EA treats their employees like they're freaking royalty. Granted, they have to work a lot, but they're treated very well. And CD Projekt Red, for all intents and purposes, also treats their employees pretty well. Doesn't mean that it doesn't suck when the year plus of crunch hits with AAA games, which happens. But they are at least treated really well by the employee. The employee, or what has happened is, ever since Google, you really have Google to thank for the good treatment of employees. So Google is well known for how well they treat your employees when you're there. The rest pods, the free food and snacks and beverages that they just, hey, you work here, you just get this for free. You don't have to worry about breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's all free right here. You're here working, you get it for free. You get great bonuses, great hours, wide open spaces, parks you can walk in to kind of, calm your mind. All this right there on the Google campus, as they call it. So like, Google started this whole trend of, when you come to work, you might be expected to be here for a hell of a long time and work really, really, really hard. But we're going to try to make that experience as enjoyable as we can. And a lot of these bigger AAA companies are starting to pick up on that. We're starting to see less people shoving everyone into, like, my office space here. You could probably fit, if you push it, a desk here. I mean, you could probably fit a dozen plus software developers in my office. If I get rid of some of the furniture, rearrange things, replace it with computer desks and stuff, you could probably fit a dozen or so. It'd be really cramped, but you could fit probably a dozen developers in here. But companies are starting to get away from that, herding everyone together into a room, and starting to give employees a bit more space, a bit more freedom, a bit more downtime during their shifts, more frequent breaks, 10, 15-minute breaks here and there, whether it's to go have a smoke, whether it's to just, relax. Like, companies are starting to take note that Google has been getting more production out of their employees despite them working really long hours, because they're allowed more frequent breaks and more relaxing environments. But that is something that is, that's just now in like the last few years starting to permeate, so I've been told, into the AAA industry, where they're starting to be like, hey, if we're going to keep requiring these long hours, let's try to make the environment here more conductive to people being able to let their stress out, relax, and do better. Not every company is there yet, not even close, but Google set a really good standard for that, to make work more enjoyable, make it a better place. I'll believe that work is finally hit, that these companies have finally hit Google's level when we start to hear about daycares. When they start to have on-site daycares that have the top-tier care in the area that's offered to the employees for free, that's when I'll know these companies have really hit Google's level, because that's what Google does for their employees. Top-tier on-site daycare, even overnight daycare, if you have to work an overnight, with very comfortable beds and situations for the kids where it's like a slumber party. It's awesome. Like, yeah, you don't want your kid to grow up there. I'm just saying that, like, it's really cool that that's like a thing they offer. And I'm really hoping that, AAA studios can get up to the point where, hey, look, like, you don't have to just leave the kids with your wife all the time. Take them to work. See them on your breaks, stuff like that. When you can, of course. Obviously, school, all that shit. Let me see. I would be gone to be able to create a real life in business. Not me. My expectation for any AAA game that's not Nintendo has been in the gutter for ages. Now, AA games are what AAA games should be. The amount of money matches the super high quality. So, he brings this up as well. David Jaff, to his credit, brings this up as well. Indie studios are crunching worse than anyone. So, say the AA industry, which is basically indie studios. Okay, you have 5 employees make a game. They make that game in, 3-4 years or whatever it takes. Those 3 to 5 employees were working 100-hour weeks every fucking week. They chose to do it, but they did it. Indie studios crunch horribly. Now, there are some that don't. Right now, one studio that's getting a lot of credit for what they've done is the studio that made Hades. So Hades, game of the year material, excellent indie game, was made by 20 people, and they touted that we have not had any crunch at all. We did not crunch even one time. That's what they claim. I doubt any of those 20 employees would ever publicly say anything to go against that. But they are publicly claiming anyways that we have not had any crunch. And that's great. That's awesome. That's still not how a majority of indie games are made either. Like, this is not just a AAA issue. Anything that people are passionate about, they're going to spend an inordinate amount of time doing it. I'll give you another example. YouTubers. I should know. I tried to do YouTube full-time at one point. Let me tell you something. When you commit to doing anything you're passionate about full-time, you ain't just working 40 hours a week. When I was trying to do YouTube full-time, my God, 65, 70-hour weeks minimum. Go ask any other YouTuber that does it full-time. It's not just 40 hours a week. If you're passionate and want to be successful at anything, you're working lots of overtime. That's just how it is. Ask anyone who's ever made it anywhere and been super successful at life if they've been able to do it without having to work overtime. Welcome to capitalism. All right, that's enough about that. Man, do we really have 182 people watching the stream? Oh, the other thing I want to talk about Cyberpunk. I'm going to scroll down. I'm just going to kind of gloss over some comments here. Corey Bohm says, did Zelda Informer pay you for a full year after they changed ownership? I was put under a new contract when Zelda Informer was bought out. So they didn't pay me for a full year to do nothing. I worked there. I was still editor-in-chief. So the new owner paid me for a year to still be editor-in-chief. It wasn't like a severance package or anything like that. I was just a paid employee when that site was bought out. It's kind of too late for Sony to rediversify. All right. Microsoft is the one that started free food. Microsoft started that? Okay, yeah. I just know that Google gets a lot of credit for it. I'm not in the industry. This is just things I read in articles and stuff like that. The cubicle office setup is archaic. It still happens. Like, what is it? What's the one company minus? Something education services. They still put all their people in cubicles in an office setting, but it's not really that bad. My dad used to work there. It's not that bad. I've been in there. It's whatever. You know, a lot of call centers, they still use cubicles. Call centers have no reason to change from the cubicle environment. You're just on the phone all day. Let me see. Google's healthcare packages are insanely good. Oh, yeah, dude. I have heard... So this is from a friend of someone who works at Google. But I've heard that their healthcare is insanely good. Like, you could potentially, like, if you're an employee that is making over $100K, your healthcare package can include, like, lots of cosmetic surgery stuff. Like, if I wanted to go, instead of like working out to lose all this weight, I could go and just have this all lipoed out and a six-pack put in on my healthcare program, as long as I had the time off available for recovery. Their healthcare will cover it. I wanted to pay a dime out of pocket. Like, that's insane. Like, to me, that shouldn't be covered. But like, I grew up with that. That shouldn't even be part of health insurance, right? That's an optional cosmetic thing. Who cares? That's how good their healthcare is. They really take care of their employees, even though they ask you to work insane hours. It's a really good precedent being set by these companies that a lot of companies can afford to do what Google's doing. They just don't. That's called reinvesting in your employees, where you expect a lot from your employees, but you give your employees a lot in return, right? That's like a more fair investment. You're asking for 60-hour work weeks, but in return, you're delivering an unparalleled work environment with unparalleled, benefits. And it's up to you if it's worth it. Is the amount of hours you work worth it? Or would you rather spend more time at home or whatever, The daycare thing is common in Japan, yeah. It is very common in Japan. A lot of businesses offer daycare services. Some of them aren't. I've heard some of them aren't the greatest, but most of them are pretty good. What do I do full-time instead of YouTube? I try not to talk about it much. I'm still not going to talk about it much. If you watch some prior content, you can kind of get a hint at what I do. And I work from home. Hence why I can do YouTube videos still during the day. And do the stream. In fact, when I'm done with the stream, I have to get to work. Then I have to do some college stuff. It's gonna be a busy day. Because I have a final due today in database. Database. Not a fan of database. Philip says, well, if a game is made by two people, can you really call it crunch when they are their own bosses and they set their own goals? It's still crunch. What is crunch? Crunch is just overtime. It's another word for overtime. What is overtime? As defined in the United States, overtime is any hours worked past what's considered a normal work week of 40 hours. So if you work more than 40 hours, you're working overtime and you're working crunch. Now, you might not get paid overtime. You might not get paid whatever, especially when you own the business. And you might be choosing to do it. But, Philip, I'm going to throw this out there. I know, because I've done my research and I've talked to people, I know me getting a degree in software development and going to become a software developer, if I want to be successful, I am going to work OT. So think about it like this. You're your own boss. You set your own goals, right? Which, by the way, most of these indie studios' goals are set by the amount of money they got. The goals are set, we need to get this game out by this day or we're broke. Indie studios are even worse. They have to rush games out even more because if they don't hit their deadline, they are they're just boned. They're out of money. They lose their houses. Some take out second, third mortgages on their houses to pay for games. It's insane. Don't act like it's like, oh, because they're their own bosses, it's different. It's not. They're working all those hours, one, because they're passionate about it, and two, they have deadlines they have to hit or they're broke. But I know as a software developer, I have to work overtime to get ahead. And I know it. If I don't want to work that profession, go do something else. I can go be a doctor. I could go be an electrician. I could go do any other job that could pay me good money and not force overtime upon me. But I know as a software developer, it's going to be forced upon me. So then why the hell do I choose software development? Because I enjoy it. And some things are worth the sacrifices because you enjoy it. So I know going into my profession, I'm going to be working a lot of overtime. It is what it is. Because I want to get ahead. I don't want to just be stuck at some low-level IT job. And again, you can argue I shouldn't have to do that to get ahead. That's a fair argument, but capitalism. Until we stop living in a world that's driven by money, it is what it is. Joyce C. Johnson says, good point. My writing takes up more time than my regular job. Love my job, but it's a break from writing. Yeah, see, like people when they're passionate about something, they don't care about working long hours. But again, it's a tough situation. Like it's not exclusive to game development. We focus on it because we're a video game channel, but it's not exclusive. Zooming on out of here later, Corey. Yeah, the quality still ends up way better than most, if not all, modern day AAA games. One, that's a really subjective opinion, Philip. Two, these indie games are being made like old school video games. What I mean to say is there's not much to them. Let's take, let me see. Let me take a, take Shovel Knight, right? Widely considered a great indie game. Do you honestly think it's difficult to make Shovel Knight versus, let's say, Cyberpunk's probably an extreme comparison. Let's say, let's do something that's a more fair comparison. Super Mario Odyssey, right? At least it's a platforming game. So, do you think that Shovel Knight takes the same amount of effort, the same amount of work to make as a game like Super Mario Odyssey? Both of them high-quality games. I mean, the answer is obviously no. It takes a much larger team. It takes a much heavier monetary investment by the parent company. Indie games are generally simplistic, which is why there are so many gamers that don't treat indie games as being equal to AAA games. Because indie games are a lot more simplistic. Now, there's outliers, of course. big outliers. The original Hellblade, before it was bought by Microsoft, big outlier. It was still made by a team of like 60 people. Wouldn't consider that your average indie studio. And it was made by people with massive experiences making AAA games. So literally 60 people who have a ton. They don't know how to make a game not like a AAA game. No, there's a lot to them, but they are focused more on gameplay and actual art style than some behind-the-scenes graphic power. See, Philip, you are too stuck. You are too stuck in the way of the consumer. Let me put it this way. There's more work done, and this is not an insult to anyone in particular. This is just a fact of the situation. There's more work put in the Breath of the Wild's physics engine, just the engine. Forget the rest of the game. Just the physics engine. Than there is in 95% of indie games. And that's not a slight to indie games. Indie games are simplistic. They're intentionally simplistic. This isn't to say that they don't have effort put into them. This isn't to say there's not original ideas. But when you talk about focused more on gameplay and actual art style, there's nothing indie games are doing from a gameplay perspective that hasn't already been done. Everything they're doing has been done in some form somewhere. Very few of them are offering truly new, unique experiences. And even the ones that do are just taking elements of other experiences and putting them together in a way we haven't seen before, which is great. But like when you talk about actual art style, you mean art styles that are simplistic that they're forced into because they can't afford to do anything else. You don't think some of these indie studios, if afforded the money, wouldn't like to go more big budget with the art direction? But they can't. They can't afford to. That's not a slight. It's just they're simplistic. Sprite artwork is simplistic. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with enjoying it. I'm just, the amount of effort it takes to create the entirety of the visual presentation of Hades versus a character modeler who's making like just one building in Cyberpunk 2077 is completely different in terms of the amount of work it takes to do one versus the other. It's not just about pushing graphic numbers. Developers don't give a shit about graphic numbers. They don't care about 4K resolution. They don't care about 1,000 billion FPS. The game developers don't care about that. They want it to play well. They want it to look nice. They want it to meet the marketing points. But very few games hit those levels. Why don't games hit the 60 FPS moniker more? Why don't they hit 100? Why don't they hit true 4K? They don't because that's not what the game developer themselves is focused on. They're focused on detail. They're focused on their preferred art direction and doing the best they can with it. Like when you talk about how, better than the muddy looking models. Welcome to the world. A lot of the art styles you're complaining about basically are the realistic art styles. The realistic art styles of the world. Huge swaths of the world are just fucking brown. If you go out, not like out in nature like in a forest or whatever, but just go out in like huge chunks of the world. Deserts, grungy areas, huge swaths of the world are just disgusting and brown everywhere. That's the way the world actually is. And so the art directions tend to, if you're making that style of game, tend to reflect that style of world. Cyberpunk. Its art direction is hyper-realistic, but also set within a kind of sci-fi-esque world that combines the whole punk old school kind of stuff together with new school sci-fi technology. And that's kind of the way that world and that art style is completely written and completely presented. Can you present that type of world in a different way with a different art style? Absolutely, but that's not the direction that they went, if that makes sense. So, as an example, you say the art styles tend to look infinitely better than muddy-looking model styles. You're just like, so basically taking, there's a lot of gray in Cyberpunk as well because the world's meant to. There's an overarching theme with Cyberpunk, but I don't want to get into that overarching theme until I play the game, so I understand it better. But the point is that you could not like those muddy-looking textures. And I'm just going to tell you what it looks like when a AAA gamer that plays exclusively AAA games looks at an indie game. You know what they see when they look at a majority of indie games? Not all of them, but a majority of them. You know, like, oh, this looks better than the muddy. You know what it says? Why do I want to play that old-school-looking shit? Is that fair? No. But is that how they really feel when they look at those games? Yeah, it reminds them of games from the Super Nintendo, which, by the way, fantastic system, but people don't want to play that stuff anymore. Not at the same level, not anymore, but not at the same level that they want to play these AAA games. Last of Us Part 2, Cyberpunk 2077, Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Pokemon. You know, even Halo Infinite when it comes out. People want to swoop up and buy those games in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40 plus million in sales. GTA 5. You know? They want to swoop in and buy those games in insane numbers. Very few indie games are going to break 1 million in sales. Because customers look at those games and they go, it's too simplistic for me. I want something more complicated. I want a 3D space. You know, think about how many indie games are not in a 3D space. Why are they not in a 3D space? It's a lot more complicated to make a game in a 3D space than it is to make it in a 2D space. This isn't about insulting indie games. It's just literally easier to make an indie game than it is to make a AAA game. This is like an undeniable fact. You can prefer the art styles and think the AAA developers are lazy or whatever the hell you want to think, which, by the way, they're not lazy. AAA developers are some of the least lazy people in the whole industry. But we'll get into that in a different conversation. Now, getting into the other parts of Cyberpunk 2077 that have been stirring some controversy. Transphobia. Game is transphobic. Now, I can't speak from personal experience. I haven't played the game, but I've seen the complaints. I've seen the examples of the transphobia. And then I've seen the counter-arguments to the transphobia. Prime example of a great counter-argument to the transphobia in the game is you can make your main character be trans. Male or female, doesn't matter. You can make a trans character as your playable character in the game. It's one of the, maybe the only major AAA game in the entire world that lets you do that. It's a pretty big feather in the we can't be transphobic when we let you be a trans character hat. The reason that I am seeing people up in arms about transphobia in the game is because there are certain advertisements and depictions in the game that over-sexualize trans people, especially the genitalia areas, right? Over-sexualize it, whether it's male or female. It seems to be emphasized in this game. However, now that I've watched, I'd say about 4 hours, not a great sample, but 4 hours of live streams of this game, one thing I noticed is everything is over-sexualized in the game. Straight females, straight males, gay females, gay males, trans. Everything is over-sexualized, and everything has an emphasis on the private part areas. For everything. It's not just a trans thing. Everyone is over-sexualized. So in a way, in my personal opinion, as someone who is not trans, I'm not interested in trans people in terms of like dating them. It's just not my cup of tea. I'm sorry if people feel like that is transphobic to even say that. It's a personal choice. I'm just not into it. It's fine if you don't care. It's fine. Be who you want to be the gender you want to be. Do what you need to do. It doesn't mean that I personally want to date someone who is that. It's just a personal choice. If you can't respect my personal choice, then how can you if you can't respect my personal choice, how can you expect me to respect your, what you feel like you should be in life? Respect my choice. I'll respect yours. That's the way it is. But everyone is sexualized in this game. So in a way, this game is more, in my opinion, as someone who's not trans, but I've seen this opinion said by actual trans people. Trans people are just being treated like everybody else. I think the issue happening in this game, why some trans women and trans men are upset about the game, is because in today's society, this world we actually live in. The only time we see trans people depicted is usually over-sexualized, whether it's in porn or whether it's in conversations around trans people. There's always this focus on genitalia, on do you have a dick, do you have a vagina, right? There's this over-emphasized point with trans people that, like, that's all they are. They're boiling them down to genitalia. That is a conversation that legitimately happens in the world we're in. And I'm sure as a trans person, it is super tiring to have your entire existence boiled down to a conversation around a private part. I'm sure that absolutely sucks. I'm sure the emphasis on it sucks. I'm sure it feels degrading and is mentally exhausting. I can just imagine if my entire existence, when everyone talked to me about me, that one, they'd always talk about my gender, and two, they'd always ask me about my dick. Like, that would suck if my entire existence as a human being was boiled down to what the hell is going on below the belt. That would suck. That would just suck. So I understand the realities of the world that trans people are living in and how difficult it can be with the way that they're always sexualized, and we're not really looking at them as people as much as we're looking at them as sexual beings, right? Which, by the way, obviously we over-sexualize, males and females in advertising and games and like we all know that we sexualize things with people all the time, whether you're gay, straight, whatever. But like there's also conversations right now, and advertisements and shows right now that go beyond all of that. But when it comes to trans, a lot of the focus in today's world is on what's going on below the belt. Whoops, my alarm. Sorry, I got a work meeting in 20 minutes. So what's going on below the belt. Okay, I get that. So then what happens is they see a game like this, which has advertising and over sexualization of trans people, and they go, God damn it, you're literally supporting the stereotype, F this game, piece of shit, blah, 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 not realizing that in the context of the world, and this is why context matters, in the context of Cyberpunk 2077, they're being treated like everybody else. They're actually being treated as equals to everybody else who is also over-sexualized in the game. So then the complaint comes across as you're complaining about in this world being treated the same as everyone else in this world. You're over-sexualized, just like everyone else is. Which is what trans people always keep claiming they want. They want to be accepted and treated like everybody else. And in the world of Cyberpunk, they are treated like everybody else. That's why you can make a trans character, because you can be treated like everybody else. You are treated like everybody else. You don't have to like that treatment, but then the complaint should just be you don't like the way that everyone's treated in this world. And that's a fine complaint to have. The game isn't going to be, there's a lot of nudity in the game. There's a lot of over-sexualization. This isn't going to be for everyone, and you can be against that. That's fine. Be against games that go down this route. That's fine. But I mean, I've seen trans people defending the game left and right because they just think, hey, this is just, we want to be treated as equals, and this game's treating everyone as equals. You might not like that treatment, but I think, the complaints are just coming because of the way the world is today and how they treat them versus in this world where everyone is treated that way. So there's other things you can complain about in Cyberpunk 20. I've heard people talk about, the way Asians are depicted, the way this and that. I don't know. The only example I've seen thrown up on the Asian thing is like a restaurant, or like not a restaurant, it's like a little side place you can go to that serves Asian food. And I don't know about you guys, but like if I was making a game, this is just I can't, I don't know the experience of CD Projekt Red. In my town, we have 3 China, or in my area, it's not really just my town. We have 3 China buffets. We have Hong Kong as a restaurant. We have Chopsticks and 2 other Chinese/Asian/Japanese restaurants. We also have a Japanese place, 2 Japanese places in the mall for food. Every single one of them that I go to and I eat, and this is in a small area. This isn't even a city. All of them, all the adults, speak with an accent and speak with broken English. At every single one. Now, the children, when they have teenagers working there, they speak perfectly normal English. You could tell they grew up in the U.S. But the adults that work at these places all have broken English and accents because they weren't born and raised in the United States. That's not a bad thing. Is it a stereotype? Absolutely, but it's also one based in reality. Almost all stereotypes have a modicum of truth to them. And so when you encounter this Asian person in the game and they're speaking in broken English with an Asian accent and offering you Asian foods, what the hell did you expect? It's like going to Chinatown in New York and expecting them all to just speak like every other New Yorker. Hey, how's it going? You want some pizza? Like, they're not going to talk like that. Most of them did not grow up in the United States. Most of them are going to be speaking broken English. That should be your expectation when you go to these places, because that is what the real world experience of going to those places is like. Now, that's not me saying that everyone's like that. Of course, I just said the teenagers, the people that grew up here, they don't speak that way. But we haven't come of age where those people are working at those restaurants. And one thing I've discovered is that a lot of Asian teens that I've seen grown into adults, I had some in high school with me, of Asian descent. They didn't want to work the jobs their parents did. They're in business. They're in finance. They're working other career paths. So we don't come across them in our everyday lives like we do, say, at a Chinese restaurant. A lot of these teens grow up not wanting to work in the restaurant industry. So, I don't know, man. Like, am I supposed to be upset that they're depicting, an Asian at an Asian store, at an Asian shop, like we experience them in real life? I mean, there's probably plenty of other, Asian NPCs walking around in the world that don't really do anything that you can bump into and say hi to that don't talk that way. They just don't have much else to say because they're just there to fill out the world. But I don't know, man. Like, I find it really, really hard to stick my flag in the ground on something like this when my experience in real life tells me that's what I should be expecting. I should expect that. It would feel weird, strangely, to not have that happen. I wouldn't be weirded out oh yeah, that, that's fake or something. But it's but that's my experience in real life. When I go to these kind of restaurants, I go to these kind of shops in Chinatown in New York, which I have been to twice. That's what the experience is like. Not all Asians are that way. Not all, people who come from Mexico and Spain speak, broken Spanglish when they're trying to speak English. It's not true. It's just, it happens. It doesn't have to be insulting. Why is it insulting to depict something that actually happens in the real world? That's what I don't understand. Why is it insulting? Why? Because there's some people that make jokes about it sometimes. There's people that maybe go oh yeah, ho yeah, chung cha chung, wah wah bang. Okay, yeah, that's a dick ass move, especially when you're doing it trying to insult them. But that's just immature people. And you'll come to learn in life that the more immature people are, especially as adults, the more you can just kind of ignore them. They're not really worth being upset about. Immature people that act in that way aren't worth your time and aren't worth your concern. You're not going to change them. It's an issue we have with our daughter's biological dad. So I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a daughter. Our daughter's the oldest. Her birthday's this week. Whoo, she turns 10 years old. I've been raising her for 9.5 years, so most of her life. But her biological dad, he works hard. Definitely works hard. He works a lot of hours. Speaking of overtime, I mean, the guy works 60, 65-hour weeks. So he works hard. Works a lot of forced overtime. He's worked his way up the chain. He went to college, graduated with a business degree. He's worked up his chain. He's making decent money. Not great money. I wouldn't say great, but for the profession he's in, he's making pretty good money. That's good. But outside of work, he's very immature. He talks to all of my kids like they're babies. He acts like how to describe it. If I didn't know him and I met him, I would think he's one of the stupidest people I've ever met because of how he acts. He acts like a belligerent drunk without being drunk. That's the best way to describe it. He is a prime example of someone that I would describe as immature. And if it wasn't for the impact he has on my daughter, I wouldn't give a shit. but I have to give a shit because of the impact he has on my daughter. A lot of her behavioral issues are in part, not just because of him, but in part because of how he behaves around her. So, in general, when you meet people like that in life, you'll quickly realize they're just not worth paying attention to as you get older. When you're a kid, when you're a teenager, all of us are immature and act and do stupid things. But as you mature and get older and start to realize, yeah, maybe that wasn't okay. Maybe when I used to, go, oh, no soup for you. Doing that quote from Seinfeld, right? You start to kind of realize, yeah, okay, maybe like it's a meme. It's certainly a meme because of the show, but yeah, I can kind of see why some people might get insulted by the accent and stuff like that. Like, yeah, okay. Maybe it's not quite as funny as it seemed at the time in the 90s. Like, you grow up and you gain maturity, and we all can still be immature about something. Like, let me just be honest with you. It's not fun being a mature adult all the time. I say this all, like, it's not fun. We need to let loose. We need to shoot the shit sometimes. Bullshit around. Be amazing fucking motherfuckers sometimes. Go out, have some drinks, let loose. Like, we all need to have a certain level of immaturity in the right settings so we can have a little bit more enjoyment out of life. Just being super serious all the time sucks. Like, some people, I guess, enjoy it, but I don't enjoy being super serious all the time. But that comes also, with an understanding of setting, understanding of place, understanding of crowd. Like, if I'm going to tell a joke that I know would be offensive to some people, but I know there's a certain group of my friends that are going to be okay with it, maybe in certain settings, I might crack that joke, but I wouldn't normally because I don't want to actually offend anyone. And in that instance, I'm not offending anyone. But that's because it's the right time, right place, right people. So, Philip says, it's all about a certain group of people who live in a magical bubble who think the world should be and what their world is in their isolated bubble. I mean, a lot of people think that way. Got to take care of our possibly damaged inner child. Kind of, Joyce. You got. All of us had that little inner. You gotta let it out sometimes. But right setting, right place. I don't know. I think it's okay to have fun in life. Like, when I'm gone on my cruise, like, I'm going on a cruise next year. First real vacation I've been on in like a decade since I had children. Haven't really been on a real vacation. Like, haven't left the state. Haven't done anything but camping. I'm going to be, me and my fiance are going on a cruise next year at end of July. So if you notice for like 1 week at the end of July next year that, there's only like 4 videos that week. They're probably videos I made ahead of time and scheduled out to go up. I plan to have one up for every day, but probably won't. If you don't see me commenting or live streaming, it's because I'm going on a cruise. I'm taking a real vacation. It might kill my channel. I have no idea. But when I'm on that vacation, on that cruise, yeah, I'll probably let loose a little bit. Because it's just me. It's just me and my woman shooting the shit, having a good time, relaxing, getting massages, going on beaches, swimming with dolphins, having some drinks at the nightclub on the cruise. Like, we're just having a good time with each other. So, I'll probably be letting loose a little bit there. Will I hold myself in at times depending on who I notice is around us? Of course, I'm going to try to be sensitive of the people around us. But, yeah, it is what it is. So, I've been avoiding talking about Cyberpunk 2077 on the channel because I've just been kind of worried about these certain facets of the internet, whether it's the crunch, whether it's the transphobia or whatever people want to claim about the game. I think I'm done worrying about that stuff for any game moving forward. I think the focus of my channel, and this is where I get into the future of Nintendo Prime. My focus on this channel is going to be about the enjoyment of games. It doesn't mean I won't be critical. When I feel like I need to be critical of a game company, critical of a game, I will be. But I'm going to start to avoid the criticisms that involve social issues unless that social issue directly affects me in a way. And you might say that's wrong, that, I should be a champion for social issues. And there's a lot of channels that do. Jim Sterling is a champion for social issues out there. There's other channels that will do that. I don't really feel like making this channel that. I don't think it's great for my mental health to worry about it. I think I just want to make the content I want to make when I want to make it. And social issues just shouldn't be a deterrent to me to cover a game. Now, if I review or give impressions of Cyberpunk 2077 someday, and I'm talking about the bugs and all that, sure. And if there's something that happens in the game that does bother me, maybe I'll talk about it. But I'm a pretty easygoing guy. It's pretty hard to offend me. It's pretty hard to make me feel uneasy. I mean, heck, I'm literally watching, like the final season of Hannibal, that old Hannibal show from like 2013. I'm in the final season of that, and it's about a serial killer, who eats people. Like, it's pretty hard to offend me. It's pretty hard to upset me about things. So, yeah. Novus Talk says, really ridiculous that a game that took 10 years is still really buggy. Honestly, the fact it took 10 years is probably why there's so many bugs. If you know anything about actual games and game making, the longer the game's in development, the more bugs there's going to be, not less. So how AAA game development works, in a nutshell. Everyone's not working on the same source file at the same time. There's pods. So this is your design team. This is your physics team. This is your AI team. This is your what team. And they're all working on their individual aspects of the game. And then they throw those aspects together. And when they're thrown together is when the bugs happen. Individually, on their own, they were probably bug-free. The physics engine, when they're working on that in Cyberpunk, the team that works on that was probably completely bug-free. But then when it interacts with another part of the game, suddenly there's bugs. And there's a lot of them. Like, the amount of bugs we're seeing now is probably a minuscule amount of bugs compared to the amount of bugs that were in the game a year ago. And you can say, well, leave it cooking even longer. Sure. And as they cook longer, they decide, we want to add more content. We want to add more of this. We want to add more of that because people are going to expect more of it because it's cooking longer, which gives us more bugs. Like, I'm not excusing the bugs. I'm just understanding from a developer perspective why they exist. All of us would like it to be bug-free. And if we wait a few months, it's probably going to be mostly bug-free. I think by the end of March, in general, we can expect the game to be mostly bug-free. The Fox said Cyberpunk 2077 had every reason to succeed and no excuse to fail, but was still a disappointment. But it didn't fail. It did succeed. Early indications are the game sold over 20 million copies during launch week. That's a success. They made back development and marketing costs in a single day. That's a success. That is a big success. Now, are there issues? Absolutely. And if you play on PC, there's less issues apparently. So the PC version, even if on lower settings or higher settings, for some reason the PC version has less issues. Dark Charger says 8 years for a 20 to 40 hour game. Here comes in that silly gamer expectation thing. We expect more, but then don't want to deal with the consequences of expecting more. The game is much longer than 20 to 40 hours if you want to actually explore the world and do side quests. There's like a 300-hour game here if you want to do everything that's in the game. But if you just want to beat the story, sure, 20 to 40 hours. Like when you talk about 8 years to rip off Deus Ex, you want to just complete the story in any game. You could break it down to 10, 20, 15, 30 hours. If all you're focused on is just, I want to see the start of the game and I want to see the end of the game, you can rush through in any of those games and get them done in a small amount of time. But if you actually, it's an open world RPG. There are hundreds of hours of side quests and things to do in this game. Like hundreds of hours of side quests. Like, I don't know what you expect. So it's like every other RPG. You can rush from the beginning of Skyrim to the end of Skyrim in 20, 30, 40 hours. But you're not. You're going to do side quests. Platform holders are offering refunds, especially Sony of all companies. It's hard to call it. Well, Sony, to clarify, Sony offers refunds for every game under a certain time period. What's different in this one is they're doing a special case digital refund because of faults. Like, that's the wording, is faults with the game. Yes. I'm not defending that the game has issues. It absolutely was not ready to go. Note, at least on console. Maybe they could have did a PC launch first. The PC bugs are very minimal. Totally expected to have a few bugs in a world like this. The PC version looks like it's ready to go. It looks like, in my opinion, that PC was the lead platform. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. PC can be the lead platform. PC is one of the most viable gaming platforms in the world. So it looks to me like PC was the lead platform. Everything else was ported. The Series X version seems to run best of all the console versions. Not a surprise there. It is technologically the most powerful system, so it probably has the least amount of issues from a tech perspective. PlayStation 5's version is pretty good. They have more bugs than PC. Both versions have more bugs than PC, but let's be honest, most of you guys don't own a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X anyways. So most of you guys are going to play this, and most don't own a viable gaming PC. So most of you guys are going to be playing on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And absolutely, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions are a travesty. They're horrible. Now, when you look at the user reviews, that's what's funny. When you look at the user reviews versus, like, people are like, bombing this game because of how it's running on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. People have to remember, the media reviews did not review this game on a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. They reviewed it on a PC, they reviewed it on a Series X, or they reviewed it on a PlayStation 5 because they have access to those. That's what the game was reviewed on. None of these reviewers reviewed the game on a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One. So when you look at, how can this game have a 91? It's because it was reviewed on the platforms that it actually plays decently on. It wasn't reviewed on the OG systems that you guys actually have access to. Is that right? I don't know. I don't think there's no right or wrong there, because there are people who do own Xboxes, like myself, and PlayStation 5s, and gaming PCs. It's kind of a, you could tell at some point during development, they stopped caring about Xbox One and PlayStation 4, focused on PC, downported to Series X and PlayStation 5 and Xbox One and PlayStation 4 all at the same time. And it just happened to run okay on the next-gen ones, so they just kind of didn't do much with it, and now it's all fucked up on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, hence why they can fix it. Like, they even noted in their update today, they said, hey, we're going to fix the issues. We're going to fix the issues in Cyberpunk. But, shit. Okay, I got a couple minutes. They're going to fix the issues. But it's going to be a few months. It lets you know that they pretty much didn't really work on the issues in the first place. They saw how it ran on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and said, that's good enough. Let's launch. That's good enough. Let's launch. Yeah, what Brian said. I've had very few issues because there isn't like on PC is the best version, least amount of problems. Series X has the second least amount of problems. PlayStation 5 has a couple glitches. Not that big a deal. Thank you, Brian C. Knock you out. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Keeping the super chat streak alive. But yeah, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One version clearly never got optimized, and they're gonna have to fix it. And they are gonna fix it, but they promise in their fix it's not gonna visually look better. If you're trying to if you want the game to visually look like it did in the previews, buy a gaming PC, a Series X or a PlayStation 5. You're not going to get that visual experience on Xbox One and whatever. So like when I hear people say, "Oh, Cyberpunk doesn't even look that good," what are you playing it on? Oh, you're playing it on a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One. Yeah, it doesn't look good on those platforms. It's never going to look good on those platforms. The game's too ambitious. The game is the proving ground why we need next gen. It's too ambitious for those platforms. This game is a technological feat beyond Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a technological feat beyond anything else that has happened on these platforms. Now you can be like, but the Series X and the PlayStation 5, they don't have next-gen versions of the game. They're just using backwards compatibility mode. Okay, that's fine. They still look way better on those platforms than they do on the OG ones. So take from that what you will. Backwards compatibility mode or not, however they got it running on the system, it runs better than it does on the other platforms. And if you want the best of the best, gaming PC. Gaming PC's the way to go usually for the best of anything, to be completely honest, but especially this game where it looks like PC was the lead platform. Anyways, I gotta get going. I got they're not going to cancel last gen version. Enough people are going to be okay with the way that I've seen people say that they legitimately still enjoy it on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, so they're not going to recall it. They're going to patch it and just leave it at that. It's still going to sell incredibly well, and it's still going to be considered one of the best games of all time over the course of the next year as it gets patched and when we get DLC and all that. Thank you guys for tuning in. Yeah, it's got frame rate issues too. It's got huge frame rate issues on the old gen. From what I've seen. I don't know the full story. Can't talk from personal experience. Just videos I've seen. Yeah, they put out a statement. And in the statement, they pretty much said it's not going to look visually better, really, but we're going to do our best to like fix the bugs and make it run better. But it's not going to visually look better. Thank you, Alexander Jensina Torres, for subscribing. Also to whatever that really odd character one that's probably a different language I can't read for subscribing 12 minutes ago. And Personality Disorder who subscribed an hour ago. Thank you so much for all of you guys' subscriptions. Thank you for the $3 super chat as well. You guys are awesome. Way more people turned out for the stream than I expected. But yeah, I if you guys want to see me stream Cyberpunk 2077, be sure to follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Nintendo Prime TV. The moment I get it for my Series X, I will be streaming it over on that channel. I want to get a lot more game streams starting this week. After today, I got finals today. I'm going to be doing more game streams the rest of this week, though. We'll be playing some Madden 21, maybe some NBA 2K21. We'll be playing some Immortals Phoenix Rising. We'll do probably a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe tournament at some point. We're going to have a lot of fun playing across multiple platforms. And heck, maybe I'll even re-up my World of Warcraft subscription at some point. We'll play a little, we'll go and level and play some World of Warcraft Shadowlands together, because why not? I play a wide swath of games on a wide variety of platforms, so why not use my Twitch channel to enjoy them all? Hopefully I'll catch you guys all over there, and Cyberpunk 2077 whenever I get a copy. All right, catch you guys later. Peace.